The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and distant snow as Thaddeus McAllister guided his horse down the mountain
No,
trail
please
toward
don't.
Silvermont. 3 months had passed since he'd last set foot in the small mining
I'm here
town,
to collect. Where's
and he
my
wouldn't
money?
be here
You'll
now
get
if not for
nothing
the
from me.
dwindling
The
supplies
lady
in
has
his
spoken.
cabin.
This ain't
Salt,
over.
flour, coffee, ammunition, the bare necessities
Not another
that
step.
even
We
a
need
man
to
who'd
talk.
chosen
Not
solitude
here, not
couldn't do
now.
without. At 42, Thad cut an imposing figure against the backdrop of yellowing aspens. His beard, once coal-black, now showed threads of silver that caught the late afternoon sun. Broad shoulders filled out a worn leather duster, and his hands, scarred from years of ranching and working the unforgiving Montana territory, held the reins with practiced ease. Those who knew him before Caroline died of childbed fever 6 winters past, said he'd aged a decade in that first year alone. Now, most folks in Silvermont had forgotten what his smile looked like. Some said Thaddeus McAllister had buried his heart alongside his wife and stillborn son on that windswept hill overlooking Copper Ridge Ranch. They weren't entirely wrong. The town appeared around a bend, its collection of rough-hewn buildings huddled against the mountainside like sheep seeking shelter from a coming storm. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer echoed off the canyon walls. Thad pulled his hat lower, hoping to complete his business without the burden of conversation. But as he approached the general store, an unusual commotion drew his attention. A crowd had gathered near the town square, mostly men, their voices carrying a mix of amusement and something darker, something that made Thad's jaw tighten beneath his beard. He meant to ride past, to keep his eyes forward and his business his own. 6 years of isolation had taught him that other people's troubles were quicksand pulling you down if you let them. Yet his horse, sensing his rider's hesitation, slowed to a walk. "Come on, gentlemen," a voice rose above the murmur. "Surely someone here needs a woman about the house. She's strong as an ox and twice as useful." The speaker stood on a makeshift platform, really just some planks laid across 2 barrels. Howard Briggs, if Thad's memory served. A man who dealt in cattle horses, and apparently today, something else entirely. Beside him, a figure stood motionless. A grain sack had been pulled over their head, tied at the neck with rough twine. Hands bound in front with hemp rope. The posture told Thad everything he needed to know. This was a woman, and she was terrified. Yet even in her fear, her spine remained straight, shoulders squared against the humiliation. "She ain't much to look at." Briggs continued, his laugh sharp as breaking glass. "But she'll work hard. Can't promise she'll be pleasant company, but for the right price, that's your problem to sort out." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some men laughed, others looked away. A few women on the street's edges pulled their shawls tighter and hurried past, disgust clear on their faces. "What's her story?" someone called out. Briggs spat tobacco juice off the platform. "Let's call her a mistake that needs correcting. Mail-order bride arrangement didn't work out. Man who'd contracted her decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Too difficult, he said. Too peculiar." He let the ugly words hang in the air. But one man's trash, as they say. The figure under the sack stood straighter at his words, and Thad saw her hands clench into fists, despite the rope binding them. That small gesture of defiance, that refusal to bend even when beaten down, caught his attention and held it. Something twisted in his chest. A memory, perhaps, or recognition. $5, someone shouted, more in jest than serious offer. $5 for a woman who can work dawn to dusk. Briggs's voice dripped with theatrical offense. "You insult me, sir. She might be homely as a mud fence, but she's got a strong back and knows how to keep house." "Then why the sack, Briggs?" another voice called, skeptical. "If she can work so good, let's see what we're buying." "Terms of sale," Briggs replied quickly, too quickly. "Previous owner insisted. Said it's better for everyone this way. Trust me, gentlemen, you're not buying her for her pretty face." The laughter that followed made Thad's hands tighten on the reins. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his years. War did that to a man, showed him the worst of what humans could do to each other. But this spectacle of selling a woman like livestock, keeping her hooded, like some shameful secret, it rankled him in ways he couldn't quite name. $3, someone offered half-heartedly. $2, countered another, and that's generous for damaged goods. The woman's entire body went rigid. Even from his distance, Thad could see the tremor that ran through her rage or fear or both twisted together until they were indistinguishable. "Gentlemen, please." Briggs was growing frustrated now, his practiced showmanship slipping. "She's a Christian woman, knows her letters, can cook and keep house. That's worth more than $3 of any man's money." "If she's so accomplished," a new voice cut through the crowd, "why is she here?" Thad recognized the speaker, Tobias Hayes, the town blacksmith. He was one of the few decent men in Silvermont, and his tone carried clear disapproval. "This ain't right, Briggs, and you know it. Right or wrong ain't my concern," Briggs shot back. "I'm just facilitating a transaction legal and proper with papers to prove it." He waved a document in the air. "Now do I have any serious offers, or do I take her to the next town?" The crowd began to disperse, interest waning. Some muttered about the impropriety of it all. Others made crude jokes that carried on the wind. The woman on the platform swayed slightly, and Thad wondered how long she'd been standing there displayed like goods in a shop window. How long she'd been standing there in darkness, listening to men assess her value in dollars and cents. "Going once," Briggs called out, desperation creeping into his voice. "Going twice, $20. The words came from Thad's mouth before he'd made any conscious decision to speak. They emerged from some place deeper than thought, from the part of him that remembered Caroline stepping off the stagecoach 7 years ago, terrified and alone, a mail-order bride who'd traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger. The crowd turned surprised to see the mountain man who rarely spoke to anyone, let alone involved himself in town affairs. Thad felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of their judgment and curiosity, but he kept his gaze fixed on the woman on the platform, on her bound hands and hooded face and unbowed spine. Briggs's eyes lit up with relief and greed. $20 from Mr. McAllister. Now that's more like it. Do I hear 25? Silence stretched across the square. Men who moments before had been joking now studied their boots or found urgent business elsewhere. The blacksmith Tobias caught Thad's eye and gave a small nod of approval. "Sold." Briggs brought his fist down on his palm. "To Thaddeus McAllister for $20. Come collect your purchase, sir." Thad dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. He pulled the money from his coat, most of what he'd brought for supplies, money that represented 3 months of trapping and work, and climbed the platform steps. Up close he could see the woman was tall, nearly matching his own considerable height. The rough sack obscured her features completely, but her posture spoke volumes. She carried herself with an unshakable dignity, a strength that circumstances couldn't strip away. "The papers," Thad said quietly. Briggs handed over the document with obvious relief, eager to be done with the whole affair. "She's all yours. Good luck with her. You'll need it." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Word of advice, keep the sack on till you're well clear of town. Trust me on that." Thad ignored him, turning instead to the woman. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rusty from disuse, "can you ride?" A small nod, barely perceptible. "My horse is just there. We'll be leaving now." He reached for her elbow to guide her down the steps, but she pulled back sharply. After a moment, she extended her bound hands toward him instead. The message was clear. She'd accept help on her own terms or not at all. Thad respected that. He untied the rope around her wrists, noting the raw marks beneath the skin, rubbed bloody from hours of restraint. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Just coiled the rope and tossed it back at Briggs' feet. They descended the platform together, the crowd parting before them like water around stone. Some stared openly, others whispered behind raised hands. Thad helped her mount his horse. She moved with surprising grace despite her ordeal, then swung up behind her. She sat rigid as a fence post, but didn't protest the necessity of his arms around her to hold the reins. As they rode out of Silvermont, Thad heard Briggs call out one last time, his voice carrying across the square, "Remember, McAllister? No returns. She's your problem now." The words followed them up the mountain trail, ugly as buzzards circling carrion. But with each mile that passed, each step taking them deeper into the wilderness that was Thad's domain, the tension in the woman's shoulders eased fractionally. Her breathing, which had been shallow and quick, began to slow. She still held herself carefully apart from him, maintaining as much distance as the shared saddle would allow, but some of the terror seemed to drain away. The afternoon sun painted the aspens gold and set the pine needles blazing. Thad's horse picked its way along familiar trails through stands of timber where elk grazed and across meadows where wildflowers had gone to seed. This was the country Thad knew better than any map, every creek, every ridge, every hidden valley. The sun was bleeding orange across the peaks when she finally spoke. Her voice was muffled by the sack, but clear enough. Why? Thad considered the question as their horse splashed through a creek bed, cold water flowing over ancient stones. Why, indeed, he could have bought his supplies and returned to his solitude, could have let another man claim her, or let Briggs drag her to the next town to repeat the shameful spectacle. Didn't seem right, he said finally. Nobody deserves that. To be sold like they're nothing. She was quiet for so long he thought the conversation was over. Then so soft he almost missed it beneath the sound of hoofbeats and wind through pines. Thank you. They rode on as darkness gathered in the hollows and valleys below. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled lonely and wild. The woman didn't flinch at the sound. If anything, she seemed to relax further, as if the wilderness was less threatening than the civilization they'd left behind. Thad found himself wondering what story the sack hid, what had brought her to that platform in Silvermont. But questions could wait. For now it was enough that she was away from grasping hands and cruel laughter, riding toward a place where the mountains kept their own counsel and a person could breathe free. The trail wound higher into the mountains, leaving the last traces of Silvermont far below. Night had fully claimed the sky by the time they reached Copper Ridge Ranch. Thad knew these paths like the lines on his own palms. The horse moved steady and sure-footed through stands of pine and aspen, guided by instinct and familiarity. "We're here," Thad said the first words either had spoken in miles. She stirred slightly, tilting her head as if trying to see through the sack. In the moonlight, Thad could make out the shape of his cabin, a dark form against the tree line, solid and weatherproof. Smoke still rose from the chimney, the last remnants of the morning's fire. He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. She accepted his assistance this time, though her movements were stiff from the long ride. The cabin wasn't much to look at. 2 rooms built of logs chinked with mud, a stone chimney at one end, a lean-to for the horse attached to the side. But it was solid, and it was his. Thad led her to the door, fumbling with the latch in the darkness. Inside he lit a kerosene lamp, warm light spilling across the sparse furnishings. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserves and dry goods, his rifle mounted above the fireplace. Everything neat and orderly, the habit of a man with too much time and too little company. The woman stood just inside the doorway, her head turning slowly as if taking in the space through the coarse weave of the grain sack. "You can sit," Thad said, gesturing to a chair. "I'll get the fire going." She moved carefully to the table and sat her hands folding in her lap with a kind of practiced stillness. Thad busied himself with kindling and logs, soon coaxing flames to life in the hearth. The warmth began to chase away the mountain chill, and he noticed her shoulders drop slightly as the heat reached her. He filled a tin cup with water from the bucket by the door and set it on the table near her hands. "You must be thirsty." She reached for it, then paused. Her hands, no longer bound but still marked with rope burns, hovered over the cup. She tilted her head toward him, and though he couldn't see her face, he understood the question. "I'll take it off," Thad said, "if you're willing." A long moment passed. Then she nodded a single decisive movement. Thad moved behind her, found where the sack was tied with rough twine around her neck. His fingers worked at the knots, careful not to pull her hair. The twine fell away, and he lifted the sack gently, slowly, giving her time to adjust to the light. The lamplight revealed her face in stages. First, the strong jaw, then the high cheekbones, the straight nose. Her hair, dark auburn threaded with premature silver, had been roughly shorn at some point, leaving it uneven and barely reaching her shoulders. But it was her eyes that made Thad's breath catch. One was deep brown, warm as good earth after rain. The other was pale green, the color of new leaves in spring of winter ice, catching sunlight. Heterochromia, the doctors called it. Thad had seen it once before in a ranch dog that had been the smartest, most loyal animal he'd ever known. And running from her left temple down across her cheek was a scar old but prominent, a pale line that spoke of some past violence. The kind of mark left by a ring on a striking hand. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Her features were too strong, too angular for traditional prettiness. But there was something magnificent about her face, like a mountain cliff or a storm sky, powerful and uncompromising and utterly unforgettable. He understood now why they'd kept her hooded. Not because she was hideous, but because she was memorable. The kind of woman whose face would haunt a man, make him question what beauty really meant. She watched him steadily with those mismatched eyes, waiting for the reaction she'd clearly seen too many times before. The disgust, the fear, the cruel words about devil's eyes and witch marks. Instead, Thad simply said, "The water's fresh." Brought it up from the spring this morning. Something flickered across her features, surprise, perhaps, or the ghost of relief. She lifted the cup and drank deeply, and he noticed her hands trembled slightly. When she'd drained half the cup, she set it down and met his gaze again. "Are you hungry?" Thad asked. "I've got venison stew I can warm." Her voice was rough from disuse and fear. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I don't want to be trouble." "No trouble, I need to eat anyway." He moved to the hearth, ladling cold stew from an iron pot into a smaller vessel to warm. The familiar motions of preparing food gave him something to do with his hands while his mind worked through the strangeness of having another person in his space after so many years alone. "My name is Cordelia," she said suddenly. "Cordelia Ashmont. Most people call me Delia." "Thaddeus McAllister," he replied, though she likely already knew from the auction. "Been living up here about 15 years now. Built this place with my own hands. Alone. Not always." He stirred the stew, not elaborating on the why of it. That story could keep for now. "And now you're here. Which makes you, what, a guest who needed help getting out of a bad situation. Nothing more, nothing less." She was quiet for a moment, studying him with those remarkable eyes. "Guests can leave when they choose. So can you." He turned from the fire to meet her gaze directly. "Come morning, if you want to go, I'll take you wherever you need to be. Give you what supplies I can spare. That paper Briggs gave me." He pulled the document from his coat and tossed it into the fire. The edges curled in blackened flames, consuming whatever legal claim it might have represented. "That's what I think of owning people." Delia stared at the burning paper, then back at him. Her eyes had gone bright with something that might have been tears. "Why would you do that?" Her voice cracked. "You paid $20. That's not nothing to a man living simple." "Money's just money," Thad shrugged. "Can always trap more furs, sell more cattle. Can't always live with yourself if you stand by and watch wrong being done." The stew was warm now. He ladled it into 2 bowls, set one before her with a spoon. She looked at it like it might disappear if she reached for it too quickly. "Go on," he urged. "It's not fancy, but it'll fill your belly." She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, and Thad realized she probably hadn't had a proper meal in days, maybe longer. He kept his own eating quiet, not wanting to shame her with attention. When her bowl was empty, he refilled it without asking. This time she ate more slowly, savoring rather than simply filling the void. "I know what they told you," she said between spoonfuls. "That I'm difficult, peculiar, unfit for decent company." "Men say a lot of things," Thad replied. "Doesn't make them true." "Sometimes it does." She set down her spoon, fixed him with that dual-colored gaze. "I need you to understand what you've bought, Mr. McAllister. What kind of trouble you've invited into your home. Then tell me." She took a breath, and Thad saw her gathering courage the way a person might gather kindling for a fire, carefully, deliberately knowing it might all go up in flames. "My father was Dr. Victor Ashmont, good man, respected physician in Philadelphia. He delivered half the babies in our district, set bones-treated fevers. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. My mother taught piano. My sister and I went to school, learned our letters and numbers and Latin." She paused, and Thad waited. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. "My mother died of influenza when I was 22. My father, he took it hard. Started drinking, then gambling. Within 2 years, he'd lost everything. The house, his practice, his reputation. He died owing $600 to a man named Silas Blackwood." The name came out like something bitter on her tongue. "Blackwood owns Twin Oaks Plantation about 40 miles south of here. Calls himself a rancher, but really he's a," she searched for the word, "a collector. Of debts. Of people. He came to me after the funeral and showed me my father's markers. Said I could work off the debt. 7 years of service, he called it. Unpaid labor in exchange for forgiveness of what my father owed." "That's illegal," Thad said quietly. "Debt bondage. Territorial law abolished it back in '82. Tell that to the county commissioner who signed off on the contract. Tell that to the sheriff who's Blackwood's cousin." Delia's voice was flat now, drained of emotion. "I signed the papers because I was young and scared, and I didn't know what else to do. My sister Temperance, we call her Tempe, was only 15. I thought if I worked for Blackwood, at least she'd be safe. He promised she could stay at the plantation, help in the kitchen, earn a small wage." She pushed her bowl away, no longer hungry. "The first year wasn't too bad. Hard work, yes, but I could manage. Blackwood mostly left me alone. But the second year," she touched the scar on her face unconsciously. "He changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending to be decent, started making demands, wanted me grateful for every scrap of food, every moment of rest. When I maintained my dignity, refused to grovel, he took it as defiance." "The scar," Thad murmured. "His ring. Backhanded me when I refused to kneel and beg forgiveness for burning his breakfast." A harsh laugh escaped her. "I threw a pot of hot lye soap in his face and ran, made it 3 days in the wilderness before his men caught me." Thad's hands clenched around his own spoon, but he kept his voice level. "What did he do? Locked me in the root cellar for a week. No light, no food, just water once a day. When he finally let me out, he told me that if I ever tried to leave again, he'd make sure Tempe paid for it. That she'd take my place in the house doing whatever he demanded. I believed him." She met Thad's eyes, and he saw the shame there, the guilt that ate at her. "So I stayed. For another 6 months I stayed and endured and kept my head down. Until one day a traveling preacher came through. He was looking for mail-order brides for settlements up north. Blackwood saw an opportunity to get rid of me and make a profit. He forged papers saying I'd volunteered that I wanted to go west and marry. The arrangement was with a mine foreman in Silver Valley. Blackwood pocketed the bride price and sent me off. What happened? The foreman took one look at me, at my eyes, at my scar, and decided I was marked by the devil. Said he'd paid for a Christian bride, not a witch. Sent me back." Delia's voice went hollow. "Blackwood was furious. Said I'd embarrassed him, cost him money and reputation. That's when he decided to recoup his losses by having Briggs auction me off. Better to get a few dollars than nothing, he figured. And this way, with the sack over my head, no one could claim they'd been deceived." She fell silent, staring at her hands, those rope-burned, work-roughened hands that told their own story of survival. "And your sister," Thad asked. Tempe. Still there. Still his prisoner, though he calls it employment. He knows as long as he has her, I can never truly be free. If I go to the law, he hurts her. If I run, he hurts her. If I speak out about what he's done, what he's doing to a dozen other women, he's trapped in the same way he hurts her. Tears tracked down her face now, following the path of that old scar. That's what you've bought, Mr. McAllister. A woman with a target on her back and a sister held hostage. A woman marked as a witch by superstitious fools. A woman who brings nothing but trouble to anyone foolish enough to help her. Thad stood moved to the window, looked out at the darkness and the mountains beyond. He thought about Caroline, about the mail-order bride who'd stepped off that stagecoach 7 years ago, terrified but trying to be brave. He thought about the life they'd built together, brief as it was. He thought about the 6 years he'd spent alone on this mountain, hiding from the world and calling it peace. Then he turned back to Delia. I don't believe in witches, he declared. I believe in men who use fear and superstition to control others. I believe in systems that trap people in debt and call it legal. I believe in cowards who hurt women because they can't stand to see strength they don't own. He crossed back to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down across from her. Here's what I know about you, Cordelia Ashmont. You survived 2 years of hell and came out with your spine still straight. You protected your sister the only way you knew how. You threw lye soap at a man who thought he owned you, and when they dragged you back, you didn't break. You stood on that platform today with a sack over your head and your hands bound, and you didn't beg, didn't plead. Just stood there with your shoulders back, waiting to see what came next. He leaned forward, his voice intense but not unkind. That's not weakness, Delia. That's not trouble. That's courage I've seen grown men lack. So you can keep apologizing for existing, or you can get some rest. Because come morning, we're going to figure out how to get you and your sister free of Silas Blackwood, and it's going to take all that stubborn strength you've got to do it. She stared at him, those mismatched eyes wide with something between hope and disbelief. You don't know what you're saying. Blackwood has money-influenced men who'll do anything he asks. He owns the county commissioner, the sheriff, half the businessmen in 3 towns. Going against him is necessary. Thad cut her off. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are bad. Especially then. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen, and it transformed her face completely, softening the harsh angles, making her eyes bright despite their different colors. You're either very kind or very foolish, Mr. McAllister. Been called both, he admitted. Truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. He stood gathering the empty bowls. You'll take the bed tonight. I'll make a pallet by the fire. I couldn't. You could and you will. You've had a hard enough day without adding a sore back to your troubles. She rose from the table, moved toward the bed, then stopped. Blackwood won't let this go. When he finds out where I am, he'll come, or send his men. He's not the sort to forgive or forget. Let him come, Thad said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who'd faced down worse than Silas Blackwood. This is my land, my home. Nobody takes anything from here that I don't allow. Delia nodded slowly, some of the tension finally easing from her frame. She sat on the edge of the bed, testing its give. It's been a very long time since anyone showed me kindness without expecting payment, she said softly. No payment needed. Just get some rest. Tomorrow's problems can wait for tomorrow. Thad busied himself preparing his own sleeping space, pulling out an old bearskin and wool blankets. When he looked back, she'd lain down, fully clothed, curled on her side, facing the wall, protecting herself, even in sleep. He banked the fire for the night and stretched out on his makeshift bed. Above, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like whispered secrets. He thought about the strangeness of the day, riding down for supplies, coming back with a person. A woman with mismatched eyes and too many scars, both visible and hidden. He'd told her she was a guest, free to leave come morning. But something in her stillness, her careful words, made him suspect she had nowhere else to go. Well, that was fine. The mountain had room enough for two people trying to find their way back to something like peace. As sleep finally claimed him, Thad's last thought was of that brief smile, how it had lit up her face like sunrise after a long, dark night. Maybe, just maybe, they could help each other remember what it felt like to not be completely alone. The fire settled into embers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, and the ancient mountains kept their silent watch over the small cabin and its unexpected occupants. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither Thad nor Delia slept alone in the dark. And that, perhaps, was enough. The first week passed in careful rhythms, like two wary animals learning to share territory. Delia rose with the dawn, moving about the cabin quiet as a shadow, while Thad went about his morning chores. She insisted on earning her keep, cooking, mending, organizing supplies, with an efficiency that spoke of years managing a household. But she did it all without the subservience he might have expected from someone in her position. Instead, she worked like a partner, anticipating needs without being asked, improving systems without seeking permission. Thad found himself adjusting to her presence in unexpected ways. The cabin felt less empty, the silence less oppressive. She didn't fill it with chatter. Delia was economical with words, as if she'd learned long ago that speaking too much invited trouble. But her movements created a companionable backdrop to his days, the scratch of her knife preparing vegetables, the whisper of thread through fabric as she repaired his worn shirts, the soft tread of her boots on the plank floor. On the third morning, he found her studying his bookshelf with surprised recognition. "You read Latin?" she asked, touching the spine of his worn copy of Virgil's Aeneid. "Some. Picked it up during the war. Had a captain who believed educated soldiers fought smarter." Thad poured coffee into 2 tin cups. My mother taught me," she said. Latin was the foundation of civilized thought. A sad smile crossed Delia's face. "Didn't help much when civilization abandoned us." "Maybe not," Thad agreed. "But it's yours, something they couldn't take away even when they took everything else." She looked at him, then really looked at him, as if reassessing who this mountain man might be beneath the beard and weathered exterior. That afternoon, Thad began teaching her the practical skills she'd need if she was going to survive out here, not because he doubted her intelligence, but because the Montana Territory demanded different knowledge than Philadelphia parlors. He started with the horses. "This is Ashwood," Thad said, running a hand along his gelding's neck. "He's patient and steady, good for learning." Delia approached cautiously, extending her hand for the horse to sniff. Ashwood waffled against her palm, and something in her expression softened a glimpse of the woman she might have been before Silas Blackwood broke her world apart. "He's beautiful," she murmured. "He's practical," Thad corrected, but not unkindly. "Out here, that matters more. Beauty fades. Reliability saves lives." He taught her how to read a horse's mood from the set of its ears, how to mount without spooking the animal, how to sit in the saddle with balance rather than grip. She was a quick study, translating his instructions into action with minimal repetition. By the end of the first week, she could ride well enough to keep her seat on mountain trails. By the end of the second week, she could saddle Ashwood herself. The shooting lessons came next. "Every person on this mountain needs to know how to handle a gun," Thad explained, setting up targets against the tree line, "not for killing necessarily, but for survival. There are wolves, bears, mountain lions, and sometimes men worse than any of those." Delia's hands trembled as she held the rifle he offered, a Winchester repeater well maintained but showing years of use. "I've never," she started. "I know, that's why we're learning." Thad positioned himself behind her, adjusting her stance. "Feet shoulder-width apart. Stock firm against your shoulder, it'll kick, but if you're braced, it won't hurt. Breathe out slow, squeeze the trigger, gentle. Don't pull." Her first shot went wide, startling a jay from a nearby pine. Her second clipped the edge of the target. Her third hit dead center. "Good," Thad said, and meant it. Again. They practiced until her shoulder ached from the recoil and her ears rang from the reports. But when she finally set the rifle down, there was something new in her eyes, not just competence, but confidence. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For treating me like I have a mind worth teaching. Not everyone does that with women." Thad shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Seems foolish to do otherwise. Intelligence doesn't know gender. Neither does courage." That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Delia asked about Caroline. "The bed," she said softly. "It's too nice for a bachelor to have built alone. And there are still woman's touches in this cabin even after 6 years. Preserves organized by color, herbs hung just so. Someone taught you that." Thad stared into the flames, wrestling with words that never came easy. "Caroline," he finally said. "My wife. She died 6 winters back. Childbed fever. The baby, a boy, he only lived 3 hours. I'm sorry." Delia's voice carried genuine sorrow, not the empty platitudes people usually offered. "She was mail order too," Thad continued, surprising himself with the need to speak. "Come out from Ohio. We corresponded for 6 months before she arrived. Her letters were kind, honest. She didn't pretend to be something she wasn't." He paused, lost in memory. "When she stepped off that stagecoach, I remember thinking she looked terrified. Here she'd traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger, and she was trying so hard to be brave. I told her right then, I said, 'If you want to turn around and go home, I'll pay your passage. No shame in it.' You know what she said." Delia shook her head. "She said, 'I didn't come this far to run at the first sign of difficulty.' We were married the next day. Had 5 good years together before—" He stopped, unable to finish. "She sounds remarkable." She was. She made this cabin into a home. Taught me that being alone and being lonely aren't the same thing, but neither's as good as being partnered with someone who sees you clear and chooses to stay anyway." The words hung between them, carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. "Is that why you bought me?" Delia asked. "Because I reminded you of her." Thad considered the question carefully. "Maybe partly, but more because I know what it's like to be desperate and have someone offer a hand instead of a fist. Caroline gave me that. Seemed right to pass it forward." They fell into comfortable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall soft and silent, covering the harsh edges of the world in pristine white. The storm arrived on a Tuesday day 3 weeks to the day after Thad brought Delia home. Not a weather storm, though one of those was coming, 2 dark clouds massing over the northern peaks. This storm wore a badge and carried federal authority. Thad saw the riders approaching from half a mile out. 3 men on horseback, moving with the deliberate pace of law enforcement. He set down the fence post he'd been setting and walked back to the cabin, his face grim. "Delia," he called through the door, "we've got visitors." She appeared in the doorway, saw the riders, and went pale. "Blackwood sent them." "Maybe. Or maybe it's something else. Either way, we handle it together." "Agreed." She nodded, squaring her shoulders in that way he'd come to recognize her armor going up, preparing for battle. The lead rider was a man in his early 50s, lean and weathered, with steel-gray whiskers and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a marshal's star pinned to his coat. The 2 deputies flanking him were younger, harder hands resting casual-like on their sidearms. "Thaddeus McAllister," the marshal called out, remaining mounted. "That's me." Thad stood easy, but his hand stayed near the rifle propped against the cabin wall. "Something I can help you with. Marshal Pierce, Federal Marshal Duncan Pierce." He produced a folded document from his coat. "I'm here on official business regarding a woman believed to be in your custody. Goes by the name Cordelia Ashmont." Delia stepped onto the porch before Thad could respond. She'd heard the horses had time to compose herself. Her chin lifted with that familiar defiance, though Thad noticed her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "I'm Cordelia Ashmont," she said clearly. "No custody involved. I'm here of my own choosing." Pierce's eyes took in her appearance, the healing rope burn still visible at her wrists, the short-cropped hair, the distinctive mismatched eyes. Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or pity. "Ma'am, I have papers here claiming you're bound by legal contract to one Silas Blackwood of Twin Oaks Plantation. Says you abandoned your position and stole property valued at $85. Hairbrush, jewelry, clothing items." "Personal effects," Delia said sharply. "Given to me by Mrs. Blackwood before she died. I can prove it if those items haven't been destroyed." "There are letters." "Where are these letters?" Pierce interrupted. "At the plantation, in my old room, if they haven't been burned." The marshal sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through thinning hair. "Look, folks, I don't like this any more than you do, but I've got orders. Either the lady comes back willingly to sort this out, or I have to arrest her for breach of contract and theft." Thad moved closer to the porch, positioning himself between Delia and the lawmen. "Show me these papers." Pierce dismounted, approaching slowly. Up close, Thad could see the weariness in his face, the look of a man who'd enforced too many laws he didn't agree with. He handed over the documents. Thad read carefully, Delia looking over his shoulder. The contract was indeed legal, at least on its surface. It bound her to 7 years of service in exchange for her father's debts, with clauses that made leaving before the term's end punishable by territorial law. "This is slavery by another name," Thad said flatly. "Maybe so," Pierce agreed quietly, "but it's legal slavery. Debt bondage contracts are still recognized under Territorial Statute Section 47 subsection 12. I don't write the laws, Mr. McAllister. I just enforce them." One of the younger deputies shifted uncomfortably. The other, older and harder-faced, kept his hand near his gun and his gaze on Thad. "And the theft charges," Thad pressed. "Those items were gifts," Delia interjected, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Mrs. Blackwood gave them to me in the months before she died. She was kind, not like her husband. She said I deserved something beautiful to remember, that not everyone in that house was cruel." "Where are the letters proving this?" Pierce asked again. "At Twin Oaks. In a wooden box under the floorboards of my room. Mrs. Blackwood's handwriting, dated and signed. 3 letters total explaining which items she was giving me and why." The marshal studied her for a long moment. "Ma'am, that's not really helpful if I can't access them." "You're federal law, aren't you?" Delia's mismatched eyes blazed with sudden fire. "Sworn to uphold justice, not just territorial contracts." "Then hear me out, all of it. Then decide if you still want to drag me back to that man." The younger deputy spoke up. "Marshal, maybe we should quiet Morrison." But Pierce's expression had shifted, becoming less certain. "All right, let's hear it, but make it quick." They gathered inside the cabin, the space suddenly feeling cramped with 5 people. Deputy Morrison produced a notebook and pencil, while Pierce took a seat at the table. The harder Deputy Beck positioned himself by the door, watching. Thad stood by the fireplace, ready to intervene if needed. Delia remained standing, her back straight, as she began her testimony. She spoke clearly, without dramatics, laying out 2 years of escalating abuse, the unpaid labor, the withheld meals, the strikes that became beatings. She told of other women on the ranch bound by similar contracts, living in fear. She named names: foremen who carried out Blackwood's orders, visitors who'd witnessed incidents, even the doctor who'd been called to tend injuries, but warned to stay quiet. When she reached the part about temperance, her voice finally cracked. "My sister is 17 years old, Marshal. Blackwood keeps her as insurance against my speaking out. Tells everyone she's simple-minded, unable to care for herself. But I've seen the bruises. Heard the rumors among the ranch hands about what happens to young women who can't defend themselves." Morrison's pencil had stopped moving. His face had gone pale as the testimony continued. Even Pierce looked shaken. "These are serious accusations," the marshal said when she finished. "Can anyone corroborate this?" "Sarah Morrison could have," Delia said quietly. "She was the cook at Twin Oaks, saw everything. Tried to help when she could, but she died last winter. Pneumonia, they said, though she was healthy as a horse in autumn." The younger deputy made a sound in his throat. Morrison, the same surname. A relative, perhaps. There's Jacob Henley. Delia continued, her voice growing stronger. He was a hand at Twin Oaks. Quit in disgust last spring. Last I heard, he was working the Carlson spread about 40 miles south. And Dr. Elias Sutherland in Silvermont? He treated my injuries more than once. He might talk if pressed by federal authority. Pierce was quiet for a long moment, staring at the notes Morrison had taken. Mr. McAllister, he finally said, looking up at Thad. You were in town when she was sold. What did you see? Like livestock at auction, Thad replied, his voice hard. Hood over her head so folks couldn't see her face. Howard Briggs ran it, had papers he claimed were legal. Whole thing was designed to humiliate and degrade. Briggs? Pierce's mouth twisted with distaste. That explains a few things. Man's been skirting the law for years, but he's careful about covering his tracks. He stood slowly, his decision weighing on him visibly. Officially, Pierce stated, I came here to retrieve a runaway debtor bound by legal contract. That's what my orders say. He paused, meeting Delia's eyes. But I found no such person, just Mr. McAllister and his... He hesitated deliberately. His intended lawfully courting and minding their own business on private land. Marshal, Deputy Beck started. Did you get any of that testimony in your notes, Morrison? The younger deputy looked at his notebook, then deliberately tore out the pages he'd written, crumpling them into a ball. What testimony, sir? That's what I thought. Pierce moved toward the door, then turned back. Ma'am, a word of advice. Blackwood has influence, but it's not unlimited. A married woman has legal protections a single one doesn't. Coverture law, outdated as it is, means a husband assumes his wife's debts and contracts. Those can be negotiated, settled, or challenged in ways that wouldn't be possible otherwise. The implication hung in the air like smoke. As for your sister, Pierce continued, that's trickier. But I'll be passing by Twin Oaks on my way back. Might be I'll stop in, make some inquiries about the welfare of young women in the household. Federal badge carries weight even with men like Blackwood. Sometimes just knowing the law's watching is enough to keep folks honest. Thank you, Delia whispered, tears tracking down her face. Don't thank me. I'm just doing my job upholding the law. All the laws, including the ones that protect the vulnerable. His expression hardened. Blackwood seems to have forgotten those exist. They filed out Morrison. Avoiding eye contact, Beck curious but silent. Pierce paused at his horse, looking back at Thad. You know he won't let this go, the marshal said quietly. Legal or not, he'll come at you another way. Men like Blackwood don't forgive being made to look foolish. I figured as much. Watch your back, McAllister. Both of you. He mounted up, touched his hat brim. Ma'am? They watched the lawmen disappear down the trail, their tracks filling in almost immediately with fresh snow. When they were gone, Delia sank into a chair, shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Married, she said faintly. He said married. Thad knelt beside her chair, his weathered face serious. It's just words on paper if that's all you want it to be. But Pierce is right. It would protect you legally, make it harder for Blackwood to claim any ownership or right to you. She looked at him with those striking eyes, snowlight from the window, making them seem almost luminous. You'd do that, bind yourself to a woman you barely know, take on her debts, her troubles, her... I know enough, Thad interrupted. Know you're brave and strong and deserve better than what life's handed you. Know you make fine coffee and don't complain when the roof leaks. Seems like enough foundation as any. A laugh escaped her, slightly hysterical. That's your proposal, I make good coffee. Well, you also darned my socks without being asked. Man could do worse. She sobered, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed, seen in ways he hadn't been since Caroline died. This is real, isn't it? She whispered. You're not just, I'm not dreaming this kindness. Real as the snow outside. He took her hand carefully, felt the calluses and strength there. I'm not asking for forever, Delia. I'm asking for protection, for partnership. If more grows from that well, we'll see. But first, we keep you safe. What do you say? For the fourth time since he'd known her, she smiled this time with tears streaming down both her cheeks. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I'll marry you, Thaddeus McAllister, and may God help us both." The wedding happened 3 days later, rushed but legal. Judge Hamilton Pierce, no relation to the marshal, though they'd served together in the war, performed the ceremony in his Silvermont chambers. 2 witnesses, Tobias Hayes, the blacksmith who'd spoken up at the auction, and his wife Margaret, a stern woman with kind eyes. They signed papers backdating the marriage certificate 3 months at Judge Pierce's suggestion. "Can't forge it too far back or Blackwood will challenge," the judge explained. "But 3 months gives you legal standing without being obviously fraudulent. I'll file it today, send a copy to the county clerk. By tomorrow you'll be legally married in the eyes of territorial law." Thad and Delia stood before the judge's desk, the ceremony more contract than romance. No flowers, no celebration, no family, just 2 people making a practical arrangement to survive. Yet when Thad spoke his vows, "I promise to protect, provide, and respect your freedom," he meant every word. And when Delia responded, "I promise loyalty, honesty, and to stand beside you in whatever comes," her voice carried conviction that went beyond legal necessity. Judge Pierce pronounced them married, and it was done. They rode back to Copper Ridge in silence, each processing the enormity of what they'd just done. Delia was now Mrs. Thaddeus McAllister, a married woman with legal protections. But she was also now tied to a man she'd known less than a month in a marriage born of desperation rather than love. "This feels like a lie," she admitted as they approached the cabin. "It's legal protection," Thad replied. "Whether it becomes more than that, well, that's up to both of us. No pressure, no expectations beyond what we've already agreed to." But that night, as they lay in separate sleeping spaces, she in the bed, he on his pallet by the fire, both were keenly aware that something had shifted between them. The easy partnership of the past weeks had acquired new weight, new possibility, new danger. The real storm broke 2 days after the wedding day 26, since Thad brought Delia home. Thad was mending fence on the eastern pasture when he saw the rider approaching at full gallop. He recognized the horse first belonged to Ezekiel Brennan, his nearest neighbor and oldest friend in the territory. Zeke was 67, a former cavalry scout who'd settled in Montana after the war. The old man rode like fury, was chasing him. "Thad?" Zeke pulled up hard, his horse lathered and blowing. "Thank God you're here. We got trouble coming." "What kind?" "The worst kind. That rancher Blackwood, he's hired himself a group of regulators, professional gun hands. Word is they're coming up here to retrieve what he claims is his property." Thad's blood went cold. "When?" "Soon. Maybe tomorrow day, after at most. They're gathering in Silvermont now, making a show of being legal-like. Blackwood filed some kind of complaint with the territorial governor about you harboring a fugitive. The regulators are claiming they're just enforcing the law." "How many?" 8, maybe 10. Led by a man named Luther Crane. Used to ride with Quantrill's raiders during the war. These aren't local toughs, Thad. These are killers with a veneer of legality." Delia had come out of the cabin drawn by the commotion. She stood on the porch, her face pale but composed. "Maybe you should run," Zeke suggested, looking between them. "Both of you, head north into Canada. Start over where Blackwood can't reach." "No." Delia's voice was firm. "I'm done running." Thad walked to the porch, stood beside her. "This is our home, our land. We defend it." Zeke studied them both, then nodded slowly. "Figured you'd say that. That's why I came prepared." He gestured behind him, and for the first time Thad noticed the pack horse laden with supplies. "Ammunition, extra rifles, food. And I sent word to the other ranchers. Some of them remember what you did during that hard winter of '82, Thad. They owe you. They'll come if you signal. Signal out to Eagle's Peak. Light a fire up there, we'll see it from the valley. Me and about 20 others will come running. Won't let them take our people without a fight." Thad gripped the old scout's shoulder. "Thank you, Zeke. Don't thank me yet. Just be ready." And Thad, Don't expect mercy from Crane. He doesn't know the meaning of the word. After Zeke left, Thad and Delia stood together in the fading light, looking out over the land that had become home to both of them. "I won't let them take you," Thad vowed quietly. "I know, but Thad, if something happens to me, you have to promise you'll get Tempe out. She's still at Twin Oaks, still trapped. She's all the family I have left. We'll get her out, both of us together. But first we survive," Delia finished. She turned to face him, and in the dying light, her mismatched eyes seemed to hold all the colors of the Montana sky. "Thad, if tomorrow brings—" He kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't calculated, just a sudden, overwhelming need to taste life, to affirm that they were here now, alive, and choosing to stand together. She froze for half a heartbeat, then kissed him back with equal desperation. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he wrapped his arms around her as if he could shield her from everything coming. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I'm sorry," Thad started. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize." Delia touched his face, her calloused fingers gentle against his beard. "When this is over, when we're safe, I want this marriage to be real. Not just legal protection. Real." "It already is," Thad said, and realized he meant it. They spent that night preparing, boarding windows, loading rifles, checking ammunition. Thad showed Delia the best defensive positions in the cabin, the places where she could shoot through gaps while staying protected. At midnight, he climbed to Eagle's Peak and lit the signal fire. Then they waited. The attack came at dawn, silent as death. Thad spotted them from the window, 8 riders materializing from the tree line like ghosts moving with military precision. They spread out surrounding the cabin, cutting off escape routes. "Delia positions," Thad said quietly. She moved to the back window, rifle ready, hand steady, despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. A voice called out from the darkness, cold and controlled. "Thaddeus McAllister, this is Luther Crane, duly authorized regulator acting under territorial law. Send out Cordelia Ashmont, and we'll leave peaceful like." Thad didn't respond. Let them wonder. "We know she's in there," Crane continued. "Silas Blackwood has legal claim to her service. You're harboring a fugitive and interfering with lawful contract enforcement. This is your last chance to avoid bloodshed." Delia looked at Thad across the cabin. In her eyes he saw fear, yes, but also determination. She'd made her choice. They both had. "She's my wife," Thad shouted back. "Under territorial law, her contracts are mine to negotiate. You got no legal standing here, Crane. This is private property, and you're trespassing." "Your marriage is fraud," Crane's voice hardened. "Backdated documents don't fool anyone. Last warning, McAllister. Send her out, or we come in and take her." "Then come in," Thad answered loud enough to carry. "But know that you'll be violating the sanctity of a man's home, and some of you won't leave alive." For a moment silence, then all hell broke loose. The first gunshot shattered the dawn silence like breaking glass. It came from the east, punching through a window shutter and splintering wood inches from Thad's head. He dropped low, returned fire through the gap, heard a man curse in the darkness. Then the world exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes erupted from 3 directions at once. Bullets hammered the cabin walls, some punching through the chinking between logs, others ricocheting off stone. Thad moved from window to window, firing controlled shots, trying to count attackers by their positions. 2 on the north side, Delia called from her post. 1 behind the woodpile, 1 by the barn. Her rifle cracked twice. The man behind the woodpile yelped and scrambled for better cover. "Good shooting," Thad said. "Keep them honest." A torch arced through the air, trailing sparks like a comet. It landed on the roof with a dull thump. Thad had anticipated this, had soaked the cedar shakes with buckets of water the night before. The torch hissed and sputtered, trying to catch, but the wet wood refused to cooperate. Another torch followed. Same result. "They're trying to burn us out." Delia's voice stayed level despite the danger. "Won't work, but they'll try something else soon. Stay alert." Luther Crane's voice cut through the gunfire. "You're only delaying the inevitable, McAllister. We can wait you out. No food, no water, no escape. How long can you last?" Thad didn't waste breath responding. He was counting 8 attackers just like Zeke said, but only 6 positions firing now. 2 were holding back waiting. Smart tactics. Crane was no fool. The assault continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Bullets chewed the cabin to splinters. One found the water bucket punching a hole that drained their reserve. Another shattered the kerosene lamp, spilling oil across the floor. Then came the real attack. 2 men rushed the front door simultaneously, using the covering fire as distraction. Thad saw them coming, shifted position, fired. The first man went down hard, clutching his leg. The second made it to the door, shoulder-checked it hard enough to crack the crossbar. The door held, barely. Delia swung around, fired the shotgun Thad had positioned at her station. The heavy load caught the man's center mass through a gap in the door. He fell backward with a scream that cut off abruptly. "Reload!" Thad barked, already moving, but it was a feint. The real assault came from the back. A window exploded, inward glass and wood sprang across the floor. A man dove through the opening, rolling, coming up with a pistol already aimed at Delia's back. Thad didn't have a clear shot. Too far wrong angle. He opened his mouth to shout warning. Delia spun, dropped flat, fired from the hip. The attacker jerked sideways, his shot going wild into the ceiling. He stumbled, fell, didn't get up. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Delia stared at the man she'd shot, her face white with shock. Then training reasserted itself. She scrambled to reload, hands shaking, but functional. "You all right?" Thad called. "Yes, I think." "Yes?" Her voice steadied. "He's not moving." "Good, stay focused." "It's not over." As if to punctuate his words, more gunfire erupted, but this time it came from behind the attackers. Rifles cracked from the tree line to the west. Different positions, different rhythm. Thad heard shouting confusion in the attackers' ranks. Then he heard the most beautiful sound in the world. "Thad, we're here." Ezekiel Brennan's war whoop cut through the dawn, followed by the thunder of hooves. 20 riders materialized from the forest like avenging angels, ranchers, cowboys, miners, men who remembered favors owed and debts unpaid, men who understood that sometimes the law needed help being just. Zeke had seen the signal fire, and he'd brought the mountain. Luther Crane's voice turned sharp with command. "Fall back defensive positions," but his men were already breaking. Caught between the cabin and 20 armed riders, outnumbered and outflanked, they scattered like quail before a hawk. Some made it to their horses, spurring away into the trees. Others dropped their weapons, hands raised in surrender. Thad burst from the cabin, rifle ready. He saw Luther Crane trying to rally his men, saw the moment Crane realized the battle was lost. Their eyes met across the churning chaos. Crane's hand dropped to his pistol. Thad fired first. Not to kill, he'd seen enough death in the war, but to end the fight. The bullet took Crane in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped to one knee, pistol falling from nerveless fingers. "Stay down," Thad ordered, approaching cautiously. "It's over." Crane looked up at him, face twisted with pain and fury. "You think this ends it?" "Blackwood owns half the territory. He'll send more. He'll send the law. He'll what?" A new voice interrupted. Marshal Duncan Pierce rode into the yard, 2 deputies flanking him. He'd been close by, after all, watching, waiting to see how this played out. Now he dismounted, surveying the carnage with a lawman's cold eye. "You'll charge Mr. Blackwood with what exactly, Mr. Crane?" Pierce continued. "Because from where I stand, you just conducted an armed assault on a private residence, attempted kidnapping, arson, attempted murder." He ticked off charges on his fingers. "And you did it claiming legal authority you don't actually possess." "I have documents, forged documents I suspect, but we'll sort that out." Pierce gestured to his deputies. "Arrest Mr. Crane and any of his associates who are still breathing. Federal charges." Delia emerged from the cabin, rifle still in hand, her face smudged with powder smoke, but her eyes clear. She looked at the bodies in the yard, 3 men down, 2 clearly dead, and swayed slightly. Thad was there in an instant, steadying her. "I killed him," she whispered. "The man through the window. I killed him." "You survived," Thad corrected gently. "He made his choice when he came through that window with a gun. You made yours when you defended your home." "Our home," she said, and leaned against him. Zeke Brennan dismounted, grinning despite the violence. "Hell of a fight, Thad. Hell of a fight. Though next time maybe give a man more warning before lighting fires in the middle of the night. Didn't think I'd need to call in the cavalry. Always need the cavalry, son. That's what neighbors are for." Marshal Pierce approached, his expression serious. "Mr. McAllister, Mrs. McAllister, we need to talk about Silas Blackwood and what happens next." They gathered in the shot-up cabin, Thad, Delia Pierce, and Zeke. The other ranchers tended to horses and prisoners outside their casual competence, born of frontier necessity. Death was no stranger in Montana territory, but neither was community justice. "Here's the situation." Pierce began settling into a chair. "This attack gives me justification to investigate Blackwood officially. But I need more than accusations. I need evidence. Hard, documentable evidence that will stand up in federal court." Delia straightened. "I told you about the ledger at Twin Oaks, hidden under the floorboard in my old room. It documents everything. The land fraud, the bribes, the contracts that are really just slavery by another name." "If it still exists," Pierce said skeptically. "Blackwood's had weeks to clean house since you left." "It exists," Delia's voice was certain. "He's too arrogant to think he needs to hide it. In his mind, he's untouchable. That ledger is his trophy, his proof of how clever he is. Even so, I can't just raid Twin Oaks without cause. Blackwood has friends in Helena, connections to the territorial governor. I need ironclad justification." "You have it." Thad leaned forward. "He sent armed men to attack my home. That's attempted murder, kidnapping, arson. Crane will talk, they always do when they're facing the gallows. He'll implicate Blackwood to save his own neck." Pierce nodded slowly. "Crane might talk, but we need that ledger to make charges stick. And we need to get your sister out before Blackwood realizes how much trouble he's in." Delia's hands clenched. "Temperance. God, I've been so focused on surviving I haven't thought about what this means for her." "When Blackwood hears about this, he'll use her as leverage," Zeke said bluntly. "Or worse. Sorry, ma'am, but that's the truth. Men like Blackwood don't take losing well." "Then we don't give him time to react," Thad said. "We go now, today. Get Tempe out and get that ledger before he knows what hit him." Pierce shook his head. "Can't sanction a raid. I'm federal law, not a vigilante." "Not asking for sanction. Asking you to look the other way for 12 hours. "Thad," the marshal started, "my wife's sister is in danger. Her evidence is sitting in that house. You said yourself you need cause for official action. Well, we're going to get you that cause. You can ride in afterward and arrest Blackwood with everything gift-wrapped." Pierce and Thad locked eyes across the table, a silent battle of wills playing out. Finally, the marshal sighed. "I didn't hear any of that," he said carefully. "I'll be conducting interviews with the prisoners for the next, 18 hours or so. If anything happens at Twin Oaks during that time, well, I was clearly occupied with federal business elsewhere." Delia gripped Thad's hand. "I'm going with you." "Delia, she's my sister. I know the house the guards patterns where Tempe sleeps. You need me." Thad wanted to argue, wanted to keep her safe here while he handled the danger, but he saw the steel in her mismatched eyes and knew she wouldn't be dissuaded. "All right," he said. "Together." "Together," she echoed. They planned through the morning, mapping out Twin Oaks from Delia's descriptions. The plantation was 40 miles south, a hard day's ride. Blackwood typically attended church in town on Sundays. It was Saturday night now. If they timed it right, they could infiltrate during the Sunday service while most of the guards were with him for appearances. "There's someone inside who might help," Delia said quietly. "Consuela Martinez. She's the cook, been there for 20 years. Her daughter Maria died 2 years ago, worked herself to death trying to pay off a debt to Blackwood. Consuela hates him, but she's scared. If we can convince her... We'll convince her, Thad said. Fear's powerful, but so is the chance for justice. They left at midnight, riding hard through mountain passes Thad knew by heart. Zeke insisted on coming, bringing 2 of his son's young men who could shoot straight and keep quiet. 5 riders total, moving like shadows through the pines. They reached Twin Oaks just before dawn, watched from the ridge as the plantation woke. It was bigger than Thad expected: main house, bunkhouse, barn, several outbuildings. 24 workers visible, maybe more hidden. This wasn't just a ranch. This was an empire built on exploitation. There, Delia pointed, that's Consuela dumping wash water. The woman was older Mexican, her face weathered by hard years. She moved with the careful efficiency of someone accustomed to invisibility. Thad watched her pattern for an hour, memorizing her routine. When she stepped into the root cellar alone, he made his move. "Señora Martinez," he said quietly, emerging from the shadows. She spun, hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Then her eyes found Delia standing just behind Thad. "Dios mío," Consuela breathed. "Cordelia, they said you were sold, gone forever. I escaped. I'm free now, Consuela, and I've come back for Tempe." The older woman's face crumpled. "She is not well, mija. After you left Señor Blackwood, She is locked in the study now. He says she is being punished for your sins." Delia's face went white. "Is she hurt?" "Thin, scared, but alive. I bring her food when I can, but it is not enough. She needs to leave this place before—" Consuela couldn't finish. "Help us," Thad said. "Help us get her out. And we'll end Blackwood, for Maria, for Temperance, for all the women he's destroyed." Consuela looked at him for a long moment, measuring, judging. Then she straightened. "I will help, but you must be quick. Señor Blackwood attends church, yes, but he leaves guards, 4 men always, and the study door is locked. I do not have the key." "I can pick locks," Thad said. "Just get us inside." At noon, the guards eat, then all together in the bunkhouse. I make sure they eat well, very well. They will be occupied. A grim smile crossed her face. "The kitchen door will be open. You will have 30 minutes, maybe less." They waited in the trees as the morning crawled past. Blackwood emerged at 11, dressed for church, 4 guards accompanying him. His carriage rolled away toward Silvermont, 12 miles distant. At noon precisely, Consuela appeared at the kitchen door, waved them forward. They slipped inside like ghosts. The kitchen smelled of beans and cornbread. Consuela pointed toward the stairs. "Second floor, 3rd door on the right. The guards are in the bunkhouse, but be quick, they will not sleep forever." Thad and Delia crept upstairs, leaving Zeke and his sons to watch the exits. The hallway was paneled in dark wood, expensive rugs muffling their footsteps. This was wealth built on suffering, luxury purchased with slavery. The study door was heavy oak, locked solid. Thad pulled his picks from his belt, skills learned during the war, when sometimes staying alive meant getting through locked doors quickly. His fingers worked the tumblers, feeling for the catch. Click, the door swung open. Temperance Ashmont sat on a narrow cot by the window, thin as a rail, her face gaunt with hunger and fear. She looked up at the sound of the door, eyes widening. "Delia!" Her voice was barely a whisper, as if she feared speaking would shatter the vision. "Tempe!" Delia rushed across the room, pulled her sister into a fierce embrace. "Oh, God! Tempe, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I left you here. You came back." Temperance clung to her sister, sobbing. "I thought he said you were dead." "He said you'd abandoned me because you were wicked, because the devil had claimed you. But you came back." "Of course I came back. You're my sister. Now we need to move. Can you walk?" Temperance nodded, though she swayed when she stood. Thad caught her arm, steadied her. She flinched from his touch, and he saw the fear in her eyes, the learned response of someone who'd been hurt too often. "It's all right," Delia said gently. "This is Thad, my husband. He's safe." He's helping us. Husband! Temperance looked between them, confusion and hope warring on her face. Long story, I'll tell you later. Right now we need to find... Delia stopped staring at the massive desk that dominated the study. The ledger. Bottom drawer, Temperance said. Left side. He keeps it there. Looks at it sometimes while he's drinking. Counts his money, his properties, his people. The last word came out bitter. Thad moved to the desk, tried the drawer. Locked. Of course. He applied his picks again, and this time the lock gave way quickly. Inside, beneath stacks of legal papers and property deeds, he found it. A leather-bound ledger, thick with entries. Thad flipped it open, saw columns of numbers, names, dates. Land parcels sold twice, 3 times to different buyers. Bribe amounts paid to county officials, territorial administrators. And on the final pages, a list of women with contracts beside their names, 12 in total, including Cordelia and Temperance. This is it, Thad breathed. This is enough to hang him. Then let us take it and go, Delia urged, before... Footsteps on the stairs, heavy boots, multiple men moving fast. He came back early, Temperance whispered, terror flooding her face. He always comes back early, to catch people when they think they're safe. It's a game to him. Thad moved to the door, peered out. 4 guards on the stairs, and at the bottom, Silas Blackwood himself. He was a tall man, well-dressed, with cold eyes and a smile that held no warmth. I knew you'd come, Blackwood called up the stairs. Sentimental fool, did you really think I wouldn't anticipate this, that I wouldn't set a trap? They were surrounded. Guards below, no rear exit, a 2-story drop from the window. Thad's mind raced through options, finding none that didn't end in bloodshed. Then Consuela appeared at the top of the stairs between the guards and the study. In her hands she held an old Navy Colt, the kind of pistol that predated the war. She aimed it squarely at Silas Blackwood. "No mas," she said quietly. "No more, senor. You killed my Maria. You killed so many others. Today it ends." Blackwood laughed, actually laughed. "Consuela, don't be stupid. You think threatening me will—" The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Blackwood jerked backward, hand flying to his shoulder, where blood bloomed red against his white shirt. He stumbled, fell, staring up at his cook with shock and disbelief. "You shot me," he gasped. "You actually shot me." "Should have done it years ago," Consuela replied. Her hands shook now, but her voice stayed steady. "Go, all of you. Take the book. Take the girls. I will stay." "Consuela, you can't," Delia started. "I am old. My daughter is dead, but you are young. You have a chance. Go." The guards were frozen, caught between their wounded employer and an old woman with a gun. In that moment of hesitation, Thad made his decision. "Move," he barked. They ran down the stairs, past the stunned guards, through the kitchen, and out into the yard. Zeke and his sons appeared from their positions, rifles ready, covering their retreat. The guards from the bunkhouse stumbled out groggy from whatever Consuela had put in their food, fumbling for weapons. Thad fired a warning shot over their heads. "Stay down. Federal marshal is on his way. This is over." They made it to the horses, Thad boosting Temperance up behind Delia. Behind them, Blackwood's voice rose in a scream of rage and pain, ordering pursuit. But his men were hesitant now, uncertain. Their boss was shot. The cook had turned on them. Nothing was as it should be. They rode hard, putting distance between themselves and Twin Oaks. 5 miles out, they slowed enough for the horses to breathe. "Is she coming?" Delia asked, looking back. "Consuela, I don't think so," Thad said gently. "But she gave us what we needed. Time. Justice. A chance." Temperance clung to her sister, crying softly. Delia held her close, murmuring comfort, her own tears streaking through the dust on her face. They rode straight to Silvermont, to Marshal Pierce's office. The lawman took one look at their faces, the ledger in Thad's hands, and nodded. "Tell me everything," he said. They did, every detail, every moment. Pierce listened occasionally, making notes, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When they finished, he closed his notebook with a snap. "Blackwood's finished," he said. "With this evidence and your testimony, I can bring federal charges that even his connections can't dodge. And if that cook of his backs up your story—" "She shot him," Delia said. "She might be in danger." "Then I'll ride out now with a full contingent of deputies. If she wants protection, she'll have it." Pierce stood. "You two get some rest. There'll be a trial probably in Helena. Could take months to sort through all this. But you've done it. You've beaten him." Outside the marshal's office, as the sun set over Silvermont, Thad and Delia stood together. Temperance had fallen asleep in a chair inside, exhausted beyond measure. For the first time in what felt like forever, they could breathe. "It's really over," Delia whispered. "Isn't it? The danger, yes. But there's still a lot to sort through. The trial, getting Tempe healthy again, figuring out what comes next." "What comes next?" She turned to face him. "Thad, about our marriage. About what I said before the attack. I meant it. I want this to be real. Even though it started as a legal fiction. Especially because it started that way. We chose each other when we didn't have to. You could have left me on that platform. I could have run after the marshal gave us a way out. But we stayed. We fought together. That's more real than any romantic beginning." Thad cupped her face in his scarred hands, traced the line of her scar with his thumb. "Then we'll make it real," he said. "Proper proposal, proper wedding with your sister there. Build something honest and true out of what started as survival." "I'd like that," Delia said, and kissed him. This kiss was different from the desperate one before the battle. This was promised possibility, the beginning of something neither had thought they'd find again. The trial of Silas Blackwood took place 3 months later in Helena, Montana's territorial capital. The courtroom was packed, victims, journalists, curious citizens drawn by tales of the tyrant brought low. Federal Judge Abraham Caldwell presided, a stern man known for his intolerance of corruption. The prosecution was led by U.S. Attorney James Morrison, young and ambitious, determined to make his name on this case. Blackwood's defense attorney was Richard Thornton from San Francisco, expensive and ruthless. He immediately tried to discredit the evidence. "This ledger could have been forged," Thornton argued. "My client's cook, motivated by personal grievance, could have created false documents." But a handwriting expert testified that the ledger was genuine, written over years in Blackwood's own hand. The ink dating proved the entries were authentic, not recently fabricated. Cordelia testified first, her voice steady as she described 2 years of abuse. She showed the scar on her face, explained how she'd received it. She detailed the system of debt bondage that trapped women in perpetual servitude. Thornton tried to break her on cross-examination. "Isn't it true, Mrs. McAllister, that you volunteered for service to pay your father's legitimate debts?" "I signed a contract under duress, yes. My father was dead, my sister was 15, and we had no money for food or shelter. Silas Blackwood presented his contract as charity. I didn't understand it was slavery until I was already trapped." "Yet you claim you were mistreated. Can you prove these allegations?" "I have scars. I have my sister's diary documenting what she witnessed. I have the testimony of 6 other women who endured the same treatment. And I have that ledger which shows Mr. Blackwood kept meticulous records of his crimes because he never thought he'd face consequences." Temperance testified next, reading from her diary in a voice that shook but never broke. She described watching her sister beaten, watching other women broken, watching Blackwood wield power without mercy. The jury listened, faces grim. Consuela Martinez took the stand on the 3rd day. She'd been granted immunity for the shooting in exchange for her testimony. She spoke of 20 years watching Blackwood destroy lives of her daughter, work to death of her growing rage and helplessness. "Why did you finally act?" Morrison asked. "Because I saw hope," Consuela replied. "I saw Cordelia come back for her sister. I saw a man, Mr. McAllister, willing to stand against power to protect the powerless. I saw that maybe finally justice was possible. So I made it possible." The land fraud victims testified. Settlers who'd bought parcels only to discover Blackwood had sold the same land to railroads, investors defrauded of thousands of dollars. The economic damage totaled $63,000, a staggering sum. Blackwood's defense crumbled day by day. Thornton tried to portray his client as a legitimate businessman victimized by vengeful women and ambitious prosecutors. But the evidence was overwhelming. On the seventh day, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On the charge of land fraud, how do you find guilty? On the charge of unlawful imprisonment, guilty. On the charge of bribery of public officials, guilty. 47 counts in total. Guilty on every one. Judge Caldwell's sentencing was swift and harsh, 18 years in federal prison. $75,000 in restitution to victims. Seizure of all property to satisfy judgments. As they led Blackwood away in chains, he turned to stare at Cordelia. She met his gaze without flinching, her mismatched eyes clear and unafraid. "You did this," he hissed. "You destroyed me." "No," she replied calmly. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone else could see it." The victory resonated beyond one man's conviction. The territorial legislature, embarrassed by the scandal, passed the Anti-Debt Bondage Act of 1886, making such contracts illegal throughout Montana Territory. 12 women received $2,000 each in restitution. Land fraud victims received partial compensation. Cordelia and Temperance received $3,500 and 80 acres of Twin Oaks land, the western parcel where Consuela and several Mexican families had been living as tenant farmers. The deed was signed over free and clear, allowing those families to own the land they'd worked for years. On a bright spring day, 2 months after the trial, Thad and Cordelia stood before a minister in the small church in Silvermont. This time there were no legal machinations, no desperate attempts at protection, just two people choosing each other in front of God and community. Temperance stood as maid of honor, healthy now after months of good food and safety. Zeke Brennan served as Thad's best man, grinning like a proud grandfather. The church was packed, ranchers, townspeople, former victims of Blackwood, all come to witness love triumph over cruelty. "Do you, Thaddeus McAllister, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Thad said, his voice strong and clear. "I already did once. I'll do it 100 times more." Soft laughter rippled through the gathering. "And do you, Cordelia, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said, her mismatched eyes bright with tears. "With all my heart." "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Again, for real this time." The celebration lasted into the night. Musicians played, people danced, food appeared in abundance. Even Marshall Pierce attended, raising a toast to the couple who'd helped him bring down the territory's most notorious criminal. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, Thad found a moment alone with his wife. They stood at the edge of the celebration, looking out over the valley below. "No regrets?" Cordelia asked softly. "Not a one. Only that it took so long to find you." She leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side. "That day in Silvermont, when you bought me like a sack of grain, best $20 I ever spent," he interrupted, making her laugh. "I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning." She looked up at him, those remarkable eyes full of love. "You saved me, Thad." "We saved each other," he corrected. "I was just existing before you came. Now I'm living." 1 year later, autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson. Copper Ridge Ranch had grown. The original cabin now had 2 additional rooms, a proper kitchen, glass windows. The 80 acres from Twin Oaks had been merged with Thad's original 640, creating one of the largest ranches in the region. 320 head of cattle grazed the valley. 2 hired hands, former indentured men, worked alongside Thad, earning fair wages and building their own futures. Cordelia, 7 months pregnant, hung laundry in the morning sun. Her belly swelled with the life growing inside her, a symbol of renewal of hope, reclaimed from despair. Temperance, now 18, ran a school in a new building on the property. 22 students from surrounding ranches attended learning reading arithmetic and Latin from the young woman who'd survived her own nightmare to help others thrive. Consuela lived in a small house on her 40 acres, surrounded by the families she'd protected for so many years. They called their settlement Esperanza Hope, and it flourished under their collective care. On this particular morning, Thad returned from checking fence lines to find Cordelia sitting on the porch, hand pressed to her belly. "Everything all right?" Concern sharpened his voice. "Everything's perfect," she assured him. "Just very active today. I think he's going to be a rancher like his father. Or she'll be a fighter like her mother." They'd argued playfully for months about whether the baby would be a boy or a girl. In truth, neither cared. They just wanted healthy and safe. That evening, as they sat by the fire reading Cordelia working through Homer while Thad studied a veterinary manual, she looked up suddenly. "I want to visit her," she said. "Carolyn." Thad stiffened. He hadn't been to Carolyn's grave since the day before he'd bought Cordelia in Silvermont. Couldn't bring himself to face that hill, those stones. "You don't have to," he started. "I want to," Cordelia insisted gently. "She was part of your life. She made you who you are. She deserves to know you're not alone anymore." They rode to the hilltop the next morning. 2 simple markers stood among the wildflowers: Carolyn McAllister, beloved wife; Daniel McAllister, beloved son. Thad dismounted, stood before the graves for a long moment. Cordelia stayed on her horse, giving him space. "I loved you," Thad said quietly. "I'll always love you. But I'm not alone anymore. Found someone who makes the world make sense again. Think you'd like her. She's stubborn and brave and smarter than me. Reminds me of you that way." He placed wildflowers on both graves. "And we're having a baby. If it's a boy, we thought we'd name him Victor Daniel. Victor for her father, Daniel for our son, carrying both names forward. Hope that's all right." The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Cordelia dismounted, came to stand beside him. She took his hand. "She'd be proud of you," she said softly. "Of us." "She'd be proud of you," Thad corrected. "For surviving, for fighting, for building something good out of all that pain." They stood together in the mountain silence, honoring the past while embracing the future. December brought snow and the baby. Cordelia's labor lasted 12 hours, long enough that Thad wore a path in the frozen ground outside the cabin, praying desperately. He'd lost Caroline this way, lost their son. The terror of repetition haunted every moment. But when the midwife, Mrs. Pierce, the judge's wife, finally called him inside, it was to find Cordelia exhausted but triumphant, cradling a squalling infant with a full head of dark hair. "A boy," she said, her voice rough from exertion. "Strong and healthy and furious about being born in winter." Thad approached slowly, almost afraid to believe. He looked down at his son, their son, and felt something break open in his chest. Not pain this time, joy so intense it hurt. "Victor Daniel McAllister," he whispered. "Welcome home." The baby's eyes, when they opened, were mismatched, one brown, one green, like his mother's. Cordelia saw Thad, saw the wonder cross his face. "Is it all right?" she asked anxiously. "I know some people say—" "It's perfect," Thad interrupted. "He's perfect, carries your strength in every cell." They were still marveling when Temperance burst in, having ridden from her schoolhouse the moment she got word. "Is he here? Can I see him? Oh, Delia, he's beautiful." The 3 of them, 4 counting the baby, formed a tableau of family reclaimed from chaos. Not the family any of them had been born to, but the family they'd chosen, built, fought to keep. Spring came again, as it always did. The Montana Territory prepared for statehood, its laws reformed in part because of the scandal Cordelia had exposed. Women's rights advocates from back east cited the Blackwood case as evidence that the frontier needed stronger protections for vulnerable people. On a warm May afternoon, a gathering filled the yard at Copper Ridge Ranch. 100 people, neighbors, friends, former victims of Blackwood, all come to celebrate a barn dance and the Blackthorns' anniversary. Ezekiel Brennan raised his cup in a toast. "To the McAllisters," he declared. Proof that love, justice, and community can triumph over greed and cruelty. May their story be told around campfires for generations. "Hear, hear!" the crowd cheered. Thad and Cordelia danced slowly, Victor sleeping in a cradle nearby, watched over by a dozen protective adults. Around them swirled music and laughter and the warmth of people who'd stood together against darkness and won. "Do you ever regret it?" Cordelia asked as they swayed to the fiddle's tune. "Spending that $20, best investment I ever made," Thad replied. "Got a wife, a son, a purpose, got a family." "You got more than that," Cordelia said, gesturing to the crowd around them. "You got a community, a legacy. You showed people that one person standing up can make a difference." "We showed them," Thad corrected. "You're the one who refused to stay broken, who threw lye soap at a tyrant and survived to bring him down. I just provided the backup." She smiled that radiant expression that still took his breath away. "We make a good team, the best." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the celebration continued. Children played adults, shared stories, and somewhere in the midst of it all, two people who'd found each other in the darkest circumstances held each other close and marveled at the light they'd built together. The cabin on Copper Ridge Ranch still stood expanded and improved, but recognizable. Inside it, Cordelia's mismatched eyes gazed out at the life she'd built, at her sister, teaching at her son, sleeping at her husband, laughing with neighbors. At the tangible proof that dignity could survive desperation, that love could bloom in the ashes of suffering. And on a hill overlooking the valley, two graves lay peaceful beneath wildflowers, while the family below lived fully honoring the past by embracing the future. In the harsh Montana territory of 1885, two broken people had found each other in the most unlikely way. He'd bought her freedom for $20. She'd given him back his heart. Together, they'd built something that money could never buy, a legacy of love, justice, and unbreakable partnership. Their story became legend, whispered around campfires and passed down through generations. The cowboy who saw dignity where others saw property, and the woman who refused to be broken. In the end, they didn't just survive, they thrived. And in doing so, they changed an entire territory's laws and hearts. The Montana wind still whispers their names through the pines. The mountains still stand eternal guard over Copper Ridge Ranch. And somewhere in the great American story of redemption and resilience, Thaddeus and Cordelia McAllister's covenant remains unbroken, a testament to the transformative power of choosing to stand together when the world demands you kneel apart.